Welcome everybody, good to see many familiar faces. In Vienna it's already dark, as in other parts in Europe because of the time shift. But in the US it's still sunny and bright, so that's good to see. So today we are happy to have Tobias. So Tobias will talk for 50 minutes about beliefs in search markets, which is, I think, an important topic. We will do the recording of this session as we always do, so then we'll record it if nobody objects to that. And if not, then I give the floor to Tobias and he has 50 minutes for his presentation.
Great. All right. Is this working?
I think we can hear you well.
But let's see. Let me try again. And now you should be able to see the slides. All right, so hello everybody. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to present this paper here today. So this is a paper which is joint work with Daniel Kremer from the University of Bonn. The title of the paper is Unrealistic Beliefs in Search Markets. So the title changed. So previously the paper was called Cursed Beliefs in Search Market, in case you've seen that presentation. This change in the title really reflects that we made a lot of progress there. So we started off with a very particular example of misspecified beliefs, and over time really managed to get more and more general, and I'm really happy about that. I think we really pushed the limits of what you can do with this model there, as I hope I can show you today. So what we're up here in this paper is that we are interested in a situation where we have consumers in the search market, and when these consumers search for a suitable product, they will have to decide at some point whether to stop searching and acquire the product at hand or whether to continue their search. And when making this decision, they have to trade off the benefits of continued search with its cost. In other words, when making this decision, they must think about what offers they could possibly find if they continued this search. Formally speaking, consumers have to form a belief about what the market supplies. Now, the common assumption that we all make here, and that I've made myself many times before, is that the consumer's belief is consistent. And this is a very reasonable assumption if this consumer is familiar with the market. So if we think about shopping for clothes or shopping for groceries, in these instances, the consumer might have a very good clue about what the market provides. And indeed, I think this is a second reason why we make this assumption. It just reflects the underlying game theoretic models we use, which is that consumer beliefs are consistent, arguably, since Nash. However, in many situations, consumers have very limited knowledge about the market. And in particular, this is the case if a product is purchased only very rarely. To give you two examples from my own life. So I'm currently in Berlin, and when I moved to Berlin, I had to look for a new flat. And obviously, I had very little information about this market, didn't know what kind of apartments I could afford and what were common prices in this market. Similarly, I got married. Luckily, the wedding was not this year. But when we were looking for wedding locations, this was just fairly speaking horrible, given that we more or less have no clue about the pricing in this market. In addition, there are obviously the common problems with hidden add-on costs there. And indeed, this is quite often the case that a consumer has very little information about the market, and this holds by definition whenever a consumer is actually making a high-stake decision. And as Daniel and I would argue, in these situations, it's likely to be the case that the consumer's belief is wrong, or at least is partially wrong. So the purpose of this paper is to study exactly these situations when this belief is wrong and unrealistic. So what we have in mind here is not a consumer that entertains a wrong belief about an exogenous object, something like a distribution of match values or so. But what we think of is a consumer that has a wrong belief about an endogenous object, such as the pricing of firms in a market. So let me be clear what we do exactly here. So we study arguably the most simple and standard search model out there, which is a model due to Diamond. And what we do is we introduce a fraction of naive consumers, and these consumers entertain unrealistic beliefs. And what do we mean with that? So the paper is written in the utility space. So there will be in equilibrium some distribution of utility, and we denote this distribution of utility with kappa. And the consumer's belief about the distribution of utility will be given by beta m of kappa, where this belief function captures the process of how a naive consumer forms his belief. So what do we have in mind here? So the belief of the consumer should not just be exogenously given and totally independent of what actually happens in the market, but we want to impose some discipline. And this discipline is this function beta m, which pins down what the consumer believes given the true market conditions. It doesn't have to be the case that it perfectly is consistent with the market condition, but it partially captures it. One way to think about this is that beta m is a reduced form model of the process of how this consumer acquires information prior to his search. So he talks to his neighbors, he talks to his colleagues, he briefly browses the web prior to his search, and this kind of gives him a little bit of information about the market, but doesn't reveal all the information to him.
Robert, can I just briefly interrupt, because the microphone maybe could be placed a little bit better so that we hear you better?
Okay.
Because there's a little bit an echo in it.
Okay, is it better now?
I would think so, or...
Okay, is this better?
I think that is better. Maybe others can just briefly speak up to...
Yeah, that's coming through better.
Yeah, okay, good.
Perfect. So what we want to do here is we want to characterize the market outcome in this paper given this belief function beta and how this belief function beta m shapes the equilibrium outcomes and what properties of this belief function beta m actually pin down what kind of equilibria we have in this market. And today there will be three main points that I want to make in this talk. So I will start off with a very simple example. And the point of this very simple example is to first make you familiar with the model, but also to illustrate you that unrealistic beliefs may actually enhance competition. And the way that I will illustrate that is I will show you that the rational benchmark here, which is the diamond equilibrium, will actually break down if we introduce a fraction of these naive consumers. I will then turn to the general case and I will characterize the equilibrium outcomes that can emerge and when they will emerge. I will show you that there can be a novel type of equilibrium, an equilibrium with penny cells. And in these penny cells equilibrium, the unrealistic expectations of naive consumers become self-fulfilling in the sense that firms make extremely good offers And this actually supports the naive consumers' idea that there are extremely good offers out there, and hence this belief becomes somewhat self-fulfilling, as these penny sales offers would otherwise, if the consumers entertains realistic expectations, could not exist. We will also see that there are equilibria which are reminiscent of Star 1989. The main result arguable will be that we can exactly pin down what property of this belief function actually determines the equilibrium outcome, and this property will be pessimism / non-pessimism. And pessimism will capture whether a naive consumer actually overestimates the value of the best offer in the market. And intuitively, this plays a really crucial role in the search market, as it is the tails of the distribution that pin down the search behavior of consumers. The third part, the third contribution that I want to mention today are some welfare results. And I want to argue that this presence of naive consumers can actually be desirable because they improve the welfare of actually all consumers in the market. The mechanism here is arguably novel. So these unrealistic expectations of these naive consumers trigger excessive search. This will enhance competition. As a result, we will see better offers from firms. Now, what we can show you is that this externality is actually very strong. And it is so strong that even naive consumers are better off in comparison to the rational consumer benchmark. So in other words, although these naive consumers maximize the wrong objective, so they are searching giving wrong beliefs, they are nevertheless better off in comparison to the rational consumer benchmark because they create competition which benefits all of them. And this externality may be stronger than the losses they occur due to searching based on wrong beliefs. There will as well be a subtle message here, and perhaps somewhat counterintuitively, this relationship between consumer naivety and competition is not monotone. So it is an intermediate level of naivety that actually maximizes the wealth of all consumers in the market and creates the most competition among firms.
Toby, can I ask you about the third one a little bit? So
yes.
Isn't this somewhat trivial in a sense that you give some kind of commitment power to consumers? So let's say if you just take normal diamond and you say, imagine consumers commit to search. Of course, if the search cost is small and resulting equilibrium is Bertrand, even consumers who have to search would benefit because it's Bertrand with tiny search costs rather than monopoly without it.
Right.
Is there something deeper than what I just said in what you were saying in 3?
So yes, indeed, you can think about naive consumers as having the ability to commit to search a lot. I guess the main point, so this is perhaps referring to the first bullet point that I mentioned here, that they can just search excessively, and this is pretty much what you had in mind, that they could commit to that. I guess what is the difference here is that we can show you that this is not that an intermediate level of naivety is here, which actually triggers the most competition among firms. So you don't want to search too much, but an intermediate level seems to be creating the most competition among firms.
Okay, I see. Might as well ask you another question I have. So is this just a modeling choice to have naivete? Could you not just have some kind of uncertainty in the model and some people had the wrong signal and they just acted upon a wrong signal?
You could as well think about uncertainty. And now uncertainty, however, is doing something really different than what we do here. So you could think about uncertainty, for example, that the consumer faces uncertainty about the production costs of firms in the market. What you, however, would normally maintain is the assumption that given each level of production cost, the consumer would actually have know the correct distribution of prices in the market. So he would learn, but nevertheless, his belief would be consistent for all levels of production cost. Here we want to depart from this consistency requirement.
Tobias, can I also ask a question related to one? Because when I explain the diamond paradox to students, then the very good students understand that the diamond paradox really depends on what you assume on out of equilibrium beliefs. Yeah, so if you say that the search costs are very small, and you look at and say marginal cost is equal to 0, then if you look at an equilibrium where prices are just a little bit above marginal cost, then the Bertrand paradox the diamond basically says, well, the consumer is ready to pay a little bit more, and therefore all the firms will charge a little bit more. But that itself depends on not so much on rationality or not, but it depends on how you specify out of equilibrium beliefs. Because if a firm would charge a price that is higher than the equilibrium price, which is a little bit above marginal cost, then if a consumer then believes, given that out of equilibrium price that he observes, that all the other firms charge price equal to marginal cost, then actually he would continue to search. And so the diamond paradox really depends on the assumption of passive beliefs, namely that everybody believes that the other firms charge the equilibrium price, even if you set a different price. But that's not so much only rationality, it's also the assumption of passive beliefs.
Yes, so I very much agree. To sustain diamond, you will need this, or one way to sustain diamond is to assume this, to make this passive belief assumption, which we as well will make here. I mean, as your own paper with Sandra shows, much things can happen if we depart from this passive belief assumption. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I thought you wanted to say that you need really kind of unrealistic beliefs, but you might also work with different out of equilibrium beliefs to break the diamonds.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, there are many ways how you can break diamond. Breaking diamond is not the main point here. This is just to illustrate that unrealistic beliefs can enhance competition. One way to see this is that in this case they break diamond. Okay.
Tobias, related question. Do you have to assume anything about whether the beliefs are higher or lower than the true price distribution?
Clearly, this will depend on this. I will be clear about this throughout at a later point in this talk. So this will come down to this decisive property of pessimism and non-pessimism.
Okay.
But yes, I will have to make assumptions on that to break down.
Sure.
Okay. Otherwise, if there are no more questions, I would directly jump into the model. So we consider a standard model in the spirit of diamond. So on the supply side, there's a finite number of firms, and they all produce a homogeneous product at 0 marginal cost. And this product generates W when traded to a consumer. So the model here is written down in the utility space. So the strategy of a firm is here to choose the utility that it offers to consumers. Note that the profit per trade, hence for the firm, is just omega minus UN. Sometimes the equilibrium here will be in pure strategy. However, typically this will not be the case. And we will denote a mixed strategy by kappa n. So kappa n is here the distribution of utility. On the demand side, we have a continuum of consumers within demand. The search protocol will be one where the consumers search randomly. They have perfect recall, hence can return to any visited firm without incurring any cost. And there will be positive search cost, which exceeds 0. We assume that the first search is free So not to be bothered too much by whether trade actually exists in equilibrium. There's a zero utility outside option, and one point that I should be absolutely clear about when introducing this model is that a consumer observes the utility that a firm offers when visiting it. So while these consumers entertain wrong beliefs about what other firms offer in the market, they really see what they get when they visit a firm. So the novelty here is that we introduce a fraction of consumers, and these consumers are naive. As I pointed out earlier already, is they are endowed with a belief function, and this belief function pins down what a consumer believes given the firm's true utility distribution kappa. And this belief function captures to what extent the consumer's belief is distorted, and I will give you a few examples in a few slides. We assume that the remaining fraction of consumers is standard and they have correct beliefs. You can think of that as them having a belief function, which is actually just the identity mapping. The timing is such that each firm first chooses the utility it offers at the outset, then the consumers enter the market and they search until they accept an offer and exit. As we all know, the optimal search rule here is a stopping rule with a reservation utility, which will depend on the consumer's belief beta. And this reservation utility is the minimal utility that a consumer's best option must supply so that she stops her search and takes this option. This could possibly as well be her outside option, and otherwise she continues her search. If the consumer has visited all firms, then she returns to the best option. And from Kohn and Chauvel, we know that this reservation utility is given by the formula displayed below, which will play no deeper role at later stages in this talk. We can now, given this, define what an equilibrium will be here. So a symmetric equilibrium with unrealistic consumer beliefs will be a triple. The triple consists of a distribution of utility kappa, a reservation utility for standard consumers denoted U0, and a reservation utility of naive consumers denoted UM. And these have to fulfill the following two properties. The strategy of a firm must maximize its profit given that all other firms adopt kappa star and consumers search according to their reservation utilities. And U0 and UM have to be optimal reservation utilities given standard and naive consumer beliefs, which are induced by the true distribution of utility kappa star, meaning U0 has to be the reservation utility of a consumer whose belief is given by beta 0 of kappa, and the reservation utility of a naive consumer is the optimal reservation utility of a consumer whose belief is given by beta m of kappa star. Essentially, this is just a perfect Bayesian equilibrium with unrealistic beliefs. Are there any questions about the model at this stage?
Yeah, can I ask a quick clarification question? I think, so the ones with misspecified beliefs, even if they searched 100 products, are going to keep the same kind of misspecification. So do you consider like as a special case varying this where they kind of start improving over time? Or?
So depending on the misspecification they have, it can be the case that all the offers that they see are actually offers to which they attach positive probability occurring. For the main example in the paper at a later stage for the curse belief, that will be the case. However, in general, we maintain here the assumption of passive beliefs. So even if the consumer sees something that's not consistent with his belief, or if the frequency of the offers that he sees is rather unlikely to happen given his belief, we maintain the assumption that he's not changing his belief. So we abstract from learning essentially. One way to think about learning here is that the maximum number of firms that he visits, n, is just reflecting that at some point he thinks, well, something is wrong, and hence he's not visiting more than n firms. But in general, we abstract from learning here.
May I ask one question? So up until now, the main difference is that you have in equilibrium, two reservation values, right? For
yes.
Naive consumers and standard consumers. What is the difference with having, for example, two consumer types because of, say, consumer set costs or valuation heterogeneity?
Right. So this will be very clear on a few slides. So our equilibrium characterization actually characterizes the equilibrium that can emerge given that you have two consumer types. However, the set of reservation utility that you can have with rational consumers is different than the set of reservation utilities that you could have with a naive consumer. In particular, for example, the reservation utility of a naive consumer could exceed the value of the best offer in the market, which you would not be able to sustain with any form of rational consumer beliefs.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. So to give you a few examples, so you could think about the case where naive consumers belief is as well the identity mapping, then he would have rational consumer beliefs, and as we all know, then the only equilibrium will be the diamond paradox where all firms offer zero utility. Delta here always denotes the unit step function. You could think about a naive consumer having overly positive or negative beliefs about what the market supplies. So he could simply shift the true distribution of utility upward or downward. You could as well think about his belief being just exogenously given. So irrespective of what the true distribution kappa is, he always believes the distribution is kappa E. Our main example will be a mean preserving spread, which is a curse belief. So in this case, the consumer attaches the probability weight 1 minus 2a on the true distribution of utility, and with probability alpha, or puts the probability weight a on the belief that the distribution is shifted upward by some delta, and the same probability weight on the fact that the distribution is shifted downward. There are several micro foundations that we can give for this mean preserving spread. So you can either think of this as being a very interesting special case, or you can look at the micro foundation that we provide in the paper, why this reflects curseness or a form of correlation neglect. In the interest of time, let me skip this today. All right, so let me first show you why unrealistic beliefs may enhance competition and why the diamond paradox may break down. This is a simple point, but what I want to show you here is a little bit make you familiar with the model that we have here. So suppose that the naive consumer's belief is misspecified such that he shifts the true distribution upward by some delta. Then the argument is that the diamond equilibrium will break down if this delta exceeds the search cost, and this can be easily seen. So diamond breaks down if we have a naive consumer that visits more than one firm, as Martin has well pointed out earlier. If we assume a diamond equilibrium, then all firms offer zero utility. If we now consider a naive consumer at the first firm, then in equilibrium, this firm will offer zero utility. So what will be his perceived benefits of visiting a single additional firm? Well, a naive consumer believes that all firms, including the next one, offer the utility level delta as he shifts the true distribution of utility upward by some delta. Hence, she's willing to conduct at least one more search if delta exceeds S. Hence, if delta exceeds S, the diamond equilibrium breaks down. The main mechanism why this works here is that the consumer entertains unrealistic positive expectations about the benefits of search, and this leads to excessive search. In this case, he visits more than one firm. This enhances competition and causes the diamond paradox to break down. But there's only a deeper message here, and this will be something that will occur again and again in this paper. What really is important here is that the naive consumers may turn down even the best offer in the market. In the diamond paradox, this is a firm that offers zero utility. There's no firm that offers more. Nevertheless, the naive consumer here continues her search when she arrives at a firm that makes the best offer in the market. And the reason is that she believes that there are what we call golden eggs, so that she believes that there are products which supply more utility than any product that is actually offered in equilibrium. And this is actually what causes the diamond paradox to break down. And this is what we need in this example.
So is this qualitatively different from kind of the Stahl solution of the diamond paradox, that you have zero search cost people who always search?
There will be a connection. It will be very clear on a few slides. Maybe if I may delay this question.
Sorry, so yeah, so I maybe also ask a question in a similar way. So we sort of know that in this model with, well, even with homogeneous search costs, if we make consumers a little bit behavioral, the equilibrium depends on beliefs. And that's the paper by Burdett and Judd. We have two equilibria, diamond and equilibrium with price dispersion. And that all depends on beliefs of consumers. And that's only because they're behavioral in the sense that they don't search sequentially, but use fixed sample search. So what's like a fundamental difference with what you're doing here?
Well, there it's driven by something that Santo mentioned, in some sense that consumers have commitment to visit more than one firm as they do not sample sequentially, right?
Well, no, they have commitment they have commitment that their rule is fixed sample, but how many firms they visit is an equilibrium phenomenon in the way that you have here.
True. As I pointed out earlier, there are several ways how you can break a diamond. This is not the main point of the paper here.
Okay.
This is just the introductory example. Okay. I hope this will become clear later. So let me tell you what kind of equilibria can emerge. And this comes down to the question that Jose asked earlier. So this in some sense is the set of equilibria that can emerge in a search market if you have two consumer groups. And we can show that only three constellations can arise. The first one is a diamond type equilibrium where all firms offer the same utility level and all consumers buy from the first firm. Interestingly, what can also happen here is that this utility level is not zero, but that firms offer positive utility. The second equilibrium is the Stahl type equilibrium. In these cases, the equilibrium will feature smooth utility dispersion, and naive consumers will actually visit all firms in the market and then return to the best offer, while standard consumers buy from the first firm they visit in equilibrium. Now, notice here that for this equilibrium, in this equilibrium, a naive consumer's reservation utility will exceed the utility that the best offer in the market supplies, and hence they do not stop but visit all firms. As I pointed out earlier in a question Jose asked, this is not possible with rational beliefs. And as Sandro asked, you can think of this as a micro foundation of shopping behavior. So instead of just assuming that some consumers love shopping, you could as well motivate this by them having unrealistic positive expectations about the benefit of search, which induces them actually just sample all firms. The novel type of equilibrium that we can have is a penny sales equilibrium. This equilibrium will feature utility version with a gap at the top. Then naive consumers stop searching only when offered this penny cell, which supplies this utility upper bar U star. And otherwise, they will visit all firms and then return to the best offer in the market, while standard consumers again buy from the first firm they visit. So we will have a regime with smooth utility dispersion, then there will be a gap, and then there will be a mass point. And the reservation utility of naive consumers will be just exactly equal to this upper bound of the support. As I explained earlier on, these penny sales equilibria are incompatible with consistent beliefs, and we provide closed form expressions for the utility distribution in the paper for each type. Let me skip this in the interest of time. Okay, so far I've told you what kind of equilibria can emerge here. And we have not yet talked about this belief function beta m, so this played no role so far. And this will now change, and we will pin down what type of equilibrium actually exists independent of this belief function. And here we'll have to make some regularity assumptions as to this belief function. So the first assumption that we will make is that this belief function is continuous. So for all kappa and S and all sequences kappa, N, and Sn, the consumer's reservation utility, if the standard consumer's reservation utility converges smoothly to U kappa S, then this should as well hold for a naive consumer. We think of this as a very mild assumption. The second assumption is that the belief function of a naive consumer preserves first order stochastic dominance. So if we have two distributions of utility, kappa and kappa prime, and kappa first order stochastic dominates kappa prime, then this should as well hold for the naive consumer's belief. And the third property is slightly more tricky. So if we deload with kappa delta, the CDF that results from shifting the distribution kappa by some delta, then we say that the belief function beta m is additive if for all kappa and delta the following property below holds. So this means that if we shift the distribution, the true distribution upward by some delta, then a naive consumer's reservation utility increases by delta. Note that this is a property that holds if for a standard consumer, so if beta m is equal to beta 0. In the paper, we as well provide a sufficient condition when this holds. The decisive property of what beta m that now, given these regularity conditions, pins down the equilibrium is what we call pessimism. So a belief function is pessimistic if for any true distribution of utility, a naive consumer underestimates the value of the best offer in the market. For example, this is the case if the belief function induces a downward shift of the true distribution of utility. And as we can see here in this proposition, if the consumer entertains a pessimistic belief function, then the only equilibrium that can emerge is the diamond type equilibrium with utility level 0. And this is actually the unique symmetric equilibrium. So this comes down to an earlier question. So in order to break diamond, we need a non-pessimistic belief function.
Sorry, Toby, can I ask something? Can you say again what you exactly assume about pessimism? Does it mean that I put positive mass on lower utility, that is the lowest one that is truly offered, or I kind of didn't exactly get it?
Yes.
What this assumption is.
Pessimism. Pessimism means that for any true distribution of utility, a naive consumer underestimates the value of the best offer.
Okay.
So the support of the supremum shifts downward.
Okay.
For any kappa. And so this proposition is a generalization of time, and a consistent belief is essentially, given our definition of pessimism, pessimistic. And hence, we see that the diamond outcome is the only equilibrium for any pessimistic belief function, not just for a consistent one. And
but Tobias, can I ask a question about this? So, if this the worst alternative in the market is in a sense happening with very small probability,
yes,
then I would think that it still might be the case that you get different equilibrium. So what is the intuition here? Because I think it's not only the kind of supremum that matters, but it's also the distribution itself, or what am I missing?
So let me give you the intuition, but pessimism seems to be the right property, because pessimism
I
is
agree
not,
that some form of pessimism is the right property, but whether this form of pessimism is the right property, that I don't understand.
yes. So on the next slide, I will show not only that pessimism is sufficient for the diamond type equilibrium to be the unique equilibrium, I will also show that it is necessary. So if the belief function is non-pessimistic, then the diamond equilibrium will not be the only equilibrium anymore for any level of search cost. But let me first explain why the diamond equilibrium here emerges. So the intuition for existence is straightforward. So if all firms offer zero utility, then because naive consumers are pessimistic, no consumer believes that there's a firm which offers more than zero utility. Hence, each consumer is willing to accept an offer which supplies zero utility, and hence offering zero utility is indeed an equilibrium. And the argument for intuition is actually the same as in diamond. So pessimism implies that both and standard consumers have strict incentive to buy at a firm which offers the most utility, and hence the most utility in the market is zero, as otherwise the firm could offer slightly less than the most utility in the market without losing any demand. I hope this answers your question. So to come back to what Martin asked earlier, so the reason why we believe that pessimism is the right property is that if the belief function is not pessimistic, then actually the three equilibrium types partition the search cost space. So if search costs are very small, then the Stahl type equilibrium is the only equilibrium. If search costs are very large, then the diamond type equilibrium is the only equilibrium. And in between, there's a regime where there's the penny sales equilibrium. Now, I want to illustrate you, explain this proposition with the help of a picture. So what we see here is the support of the equilibrium utility distribution for a particular belief function. And the belief function that we are studying here is the mean preserving spread that I introduced earlier on. And what we see here in red is the support of the utility distribution. Notice that in the penny sales regime, we see this gap in the support, and in the diamond regime, all firms offer zero utility. In blue, what we see here are the consumer's reservation utilities. So let me give you some intuition for this picture. So intuitively, if search costs are very large, no consumer is willing to search, and hence firms keep their entire surplus from trade and offer zero utility. And you see both consumers' reservation utilities are in equilibrium, actually below zero, meaning they are willing to accept an offer which supplies zero utility. Now, if search costs are very small, what we can show is that naive consumers will believe that they are golden eggs. So they will believe that there are offers out there which actually offer more utility than any offer that is actually offered in equilibrium. Now, non-pessimism actually only means that there is one distribution of true utility, kappa, for which the consumer, a naive consumer, overestimates the value of the best offer in the market. However, what we can show is that due to our regularity assumptions, it will be the case that if search costs become small, then the naive consumer overestimates the value of the best offer in the market. And hence, as search costs become arbitrarily small, he's not willing to stop searching anymore until he has found one of these extremely good offers, one of these golden eggs. And as in reality they don't exist, they sample all firms and then return to the best offer. Hence they behave like shoppers in style, and that's the reason why for small search costs we only have this style type equilibrium. We as well can see in the picture that the reservation utilities actually exceed the value of the best offer here. For the intermediate range, we see these penny sales equilibrium. So here, the best offer in the market supplies exactly enough utility to just make a naive consumer indifferent about whether to buy the product or to continue searching. And the way to think about this is that if search costs are really small, then these naive consumers have really inflated beliefs, and it's very costly for a firm to make an offer that induces them to stop. Now, as search costs increase, this cost or the utility that they have to offer decreases. And at some point, these firms are willing to make an offer that induces them to stop and buy. And this exactly is the penny sales regime. And as search costs increase, actually in this regime, the probability with which they make an offer that induces them to stop and buy goes from 0 to 1. And here at this point, all firms in the market actually offer this penny sale. And we actually have no utility dispersion anymore in equilibrium. And that's when a smooth transition to the diamond regime occurs. So there's a continuum of equilibria actually for the value S1 here.
Can I ask something again? So according to this intuition that you kind of gave here, why you in this middle region, I would imagine that the gap between these two, the extreme, like the penny sale and the upper bound of the rest of the distribution somehow shrinks, but it actually seems to become larger. But I guess the mass shifts more to something happens with the mass shifting from one part to another as well.
True, that's a good observation. Well, I guess the intuition for this is that if you're like at a very low level of search costs here, there's a small probability that these naive consumers actually encounter a penny sale. Hence, there are many returning consumers. And hence, those firms that make an offer that only are targeted at these standard consumers who buy from the first firm they visit, and these returning consumers, they have incentives to make quite competitive offers to get a fraction of these. Now, as the fraction of firms or the probability with which firms make these penny sale offers, the less consumers you have returning, and the more likely these firms are just to offer zero utility, so to get as much utility from the standard consumers that buy from them, irrespective of the utility that they offer.
Okay, so the mass shifts somehow onto this continuous part of the distribution.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
You have only 1 or 2 minutes left.
Okay, then let me very briefly mention comparative statics results. So what we provide comparative statics results for the mean preserving spread that I introduced earlier. And this is what we see here is the same picture that we saw earlier, where we just changed the level of naivete. This is here. So if the consumers are very cursed, very naive, we are in the star regime, while if they are the level of naivete is really small, then we are in this diamond regime intuitively. What we see here, this is the level, the welfare of naive consumers, and this is the welfare of standard consumers. And what we see is that this welfare actually goes from 0, it increases here when we break diamond, and then it only falls. So the welfare of both consumers is actually, in this case, single peaked, and it is an intermediate level of naivety that maximizes naive and standard consumer welfare. And there's a nice intuition, as I believe. So you want that these naive consumers are slightly cursed, or that they exhibit some level of naivety, so to break down, so to get them searching. And this induces firms to make these extremely good penny sale offers. However, if they become more naive, then the firms are less willing to do so. And actually the probability math which they offer this penny sale decreases here in the penny sales regime. And actually the expected utility falls throughout here, although the support indicates something different. And this captures that it just becomes way too costly to make this offer that induces them to stop and buy. And hence, actually, what is welfare optimal from the consumer's point of view is this low level of naivety, which has enough naivety so that it breaks diamond. But in addition to that, we don't want any more naivety. All right, let me wrap up then. So this paper integrates naive consumers with unrealistic beliefs in the standard model of a search market. I show you that naive consumers may engage in excessive consumer search. I show you that this breaks diamond, and that the style type equilibria emerge when naive consumers behave like shoppers. Most importantly, we saw that there's a novel type of equilibrium with penny sales, and I argued that these penny sales equilibrium are inconsistent with rational beliefs. And I showed you that the decisive property of the belief function, which actually breaks diamond, is this non-pessimism. I argued that there's a novel mechanism where naive consumers may exert a positive externality on sophisticated and other naive consumers. And I showed you a more subtle part to this message, so that it is actually a medium level of naivety, which improves naive and standard consumer welfare in comparison to a situation when there are no naive consumers. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's indeed exactly in time. So there's still a few minutes for questions.
I have a question for you. I was just, or just a thought that your naive consumers seem to be very smart, stupid people, in the sense that they are somehow they are getting right what the firms are doing, in sense that there's like a fixed point on the kappa. They've got that right, but then they've got this error on top of it, that somehow they're nailing the true thing, but then they've added noise. And as you move your parameters, again, they've nailed it, but then they are mucking up. So there's this, it's a bit, in a sense, I don't know if you've heard of the quantal response equilibria.
Right. So
logit response equilibria,
right.
There's this analogous sort of property and the analogous criticism there.
Right.
But
so
what do you think?
Yeah, so yeah, but there's a common answer to this. I mean, it's not that you would think here that the naive consumers through introspection figure out the right equilibrium. It's just like you want that this belief is somehow tied to the equilibrium outcome. So this is what you technically do. I mean, the alternative would be to just impose an exogenous belief, right?
Yeah. No, it's an equilibrium consistency condition, but somehow there seems a little bit of a
well, you can't
between the fact that, I mean, I know we put in these sort of rational expectations. It's like rational expectations, but right. With this chunk of systematic irrationality tacked on the end.
Right. But I mean, it's so it's the common assumption in all models of wrong beliefs that I'm aware of. So it's the case in the cursed equilibrium, it's case in the analogy-based equilibrium. You somehow want to tie this wrong belief to the equilibrium outcome, right?
You can't sort of think that they're learning it in a sense, because they're still mucking it up and they're getting it wrong. It's hard to think about the mechanism.
You could. So you could. Depends on the particular belief function you look at. I mean, we are here extremely general. We allow any belief function, but some of these belief functions you can actually as well tell a learning story. So suppose you have a market where there's a distribution of quality, there's a distribution of prices. That would be the story of the cursed equilibrium. And the naive consumers, they correctly learn the distribution of quality and prices, but they get the correlation wrong, for example. That would be the story of cursedness in analogy-based reasoning. So there is some learning in the background, but they don't understand everything. I mean, this would essentially depend on the particular belief function you look at.
Okay, other questions?
Yeah, so just kind of a curiosity on whether you looked at it. Did you try doing like a differentiated products version of this with like a duopoly just to see if you could get similar results with a different form of like with something that doesn't have this paradox built into it?
Well, we wanted to have something with an interesting endogenous object where there's a distribution of prices. And hence we look at a homogeneous product case. And you could, I mean, in general, you could use this misspecified beliefs as well for an exogenous object. This is like a distribution of match values. And you could write certainly down a model, Wolinski style model, where you just, you overestimate the variance of the distribution of match values, and this induces you to search too much. What we were more interested in here is that you have this complicated endogenous object, which is this price distribution, and it's really hard to figure this out. And hence, we were interested in this kind of model. But I would think that you would as well have something like oversearch, given certain types of misspecification of beliefs and other types of model. I mean, honestly, we wanted to think about this, and we took arguably the most tractable model out there. And I think this allowed us to be very, very general in terms of the misspecification of beliefs and really pin down the properties of this. You could do this with other models as well.
Well, you could certainly take some kind of Wolinski type model without price distributions, just presume that some consumers always believe that there are better than equilibrium prices by some delta out there. So they kind of search more than they should. I mean, there's the distribution is a point distribution, but it just shifted for them somewhere.
Good. You could as well do that.
Okay. No more comments, suggestions, questions, then.
Can I still ask one more thing? Like coming back to this pessimism feature, would you want to say something about whether you think naive consumers in general have this feature of having pessimistic beliefs or not?
Yeah, maybe related. So can I ask, related to this? So in the end, what is happening is that these naive consumers, they have this mean preserving, right? So
yes. So for the welfare results, we make this assumption. For the remainder of the paper, we do not.
Okay. So I see. Okay, because yeah, mean preserving. That it would imply that they expect less variance, I believe. No, this is pessimism. Pessimism would be that they expect the distribution to be more concentrated around the mean.
Yes, that would be a. So if you would have a misspecification of the belief function, which induces a contraction in some sense, then this would be a pessimistic belief, and the only equilibrium would be diamond. So I showed you the plot with the different equilibrium regimes. I did this for this mean preserving spread exactly because the mean preserving spread is non-pessimistic, and hence the full range of equilibrium types exists for different levels of search cost.
Okay.
Whether a naive consumer's belief function is in general pessimistic or optimistic or not pessimistic, I don't know. I would argue it's presumably strongly depending on the markets that you're looking at. I mean, in the audience, there are some people that are doing empirical research on eliciting beliefs. I guess it depends.
Good. Okay, so I think that is it. Time is up. Thank you very much all for attending. Tobit, thank you for presenting. And next week we meet again, same time, same spot. Thanks. See you then.
In case anybody has some questions, I want